Everybody, welcome to the Ghost Show. I am Sika Groves, and I am your afterlife switchboard operator. And my co-host here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ian. I am also one of the hosts of the Ghost Show, and I'm a paranormal researcher and a paranormal investigator.
And we're waiting on Rachel today. She's busy off doing other things, so hopefully she'll be able to join us at some point in the show. But today we're going to be talking about this mysterious airplane. And I know we touched on it last week just at the end of the episode. And so, Ian, I'm going to let you drive or steer or fly the show today because I don't know a lot about this plane, but I'm really intrigued to find out. So why don't you start by sort of filling us in on the whole concept of this haunted plane?
Okay, well, for today's show, we are going to go into the desert and we are going to talk about an airplane that is named Lady Be Good.
Oh, okay.
Now, the Lady Be Good was a B-24 bomber in World War II with the United States Army Air Force. The airplane was based at an airstrip called Solich, which was near Benghazi in Libya. And on its first mission, it was scheduled to take off in a formation group to bomb the harbor docks at Naples in Italy.
Oh,
and unfortunately, for the crew of the Lady Be Good, this was their first and last mission. Air crew in the B-24 was 9 individuals. And in the case of the Lady Be Good, the pilot was Lieutenant William Hatton, co-pilot Lieutenant Robert Toner, navigator Lieutenant D.P. Hayes, bombardier Lieutenant John Waravka, flight engineer Sergeant Harold Ripslinger, radio operator Sergeant Robert Lamotte, flight engineer Guy Shelley, radio operator Vernon Moore, and those last two were also gunners, in addition to their flight engineer and radio operator duties. And then the third gunner was Samuel Adams. Now, as I say, the plane had been scheduled to take off in 2 groups to bomb the harbor at Naples. And the Lady Be Good was one of the very last aircraft in the second group to take off, which meant that it fell behind and they really struggled because they had to catch up to the main group so that these 2 groups of aircraft could form together into one massive bombing platform. And what happened is, with the Sahara and everything in that Mediterranean region, they encountered a severe sandstorm.
Oh, really?
And the weather was terrible, poor visibility. The target was obscured, and they had to abort because they had no way of knowing where they were bombing because they couldn't see. And so they aborted the missions. The groups of aircraft, they turned back around and were going back to base. And it was on this return trip back to their airbase that Lady Be Good ran into the problems that it encountered.
Now, before we continue, Rachel has arrived, so let's.
Oh, excellent.
Let's welcome her to the show.
One. It's
Hey,
great to be
Rachel.
here.
Glad you could make
Hello.
it.
Yeah,
Another week, another show.
that's it. So
And it's
Ian
not
was
the
talking
vampire
about
show this time.
that's it. Ian's been talking about the Lady Be Good, which is today's show topic. We're talking about this airplane. So Ian, if you want to kind of continue and tell us a little bit more about what happened during the, I guess this was an actual military exercise that they're on now. It wasn't like training.
Yeah, no, this was an
Okay.
actual bombing mission to go and bomb the harbor at Naples in Italy. Okay, so as I mentioned, they ran into sandstorm weather issues, had to abort the mission and turn back to their Air Force base. What happened is that the aircraft's radio direction finder stopped working.
Oh,
And this direction finder on those old airplanes is part of the major navigation system that they rely on to know what direction they're going, like in conjunction with a compass.
right.
The navigator would listen to a radio signal in his headphones and he could correlate distances and directions. Well, this unit failed.
Mm.
So what happened because of this? They failed to then at that point recognize where they were, and they thought they were still over the Mediterranean. And what in fact had happened already is that they had already overflown their base going back, and they were now headed out into the desert over land, even though they were thinking they were still out over the sea. And what happened is they went 400 miles
Wow.
off
Oh my
course beyond
goodness.
their Air Force base, still thinking they were out over the Mediterranean. And so, of course, what happened is the airplane began to run out of fuel. And by this time, it's dark, it's night. They can't see anything. Obviously, there's no lights out in the desert. They've got their radio direction finder not working. They don't know where they are. And so it's, as I say, it's believed that the men assumed that they were still flying over the Mediterranean. And as the airplane began to run out of fuel, they made the decision to bail out of the airplane. And that's what they did. Out of the crew of the 9 men, 8 of them survived the bailout. The 9th one, unfortunately, had his parachute fail to completely open.
Oh,
So
wow.
he was killed immediately.
Oh no. How sad.
So,
After they bailed out, surprisingly, the aircraft kept going
weird.
for
Okay.
another
That's
short
so
period of time. And it then finally did run out of fuel and just, belly landed in the desert.
Wow.
And what I have here, it says it was about 15 miles. The plane made it unmanned, flew for another 15 miles and then crashed. And when it crashed, it just literally snapped the airplane in half. And so the men, there they are now, 15 miles away from their airplane. Again, they didn't know where they were. You'd think it would have made sense if they'd known where the airplane went down. They could have rendezvoused with the plane for shelter. It still had water, provisions, et cetera, et cetera. But unfortunately, what happened is because they once they realized, okay, we're on the ground, we're in the desert, they still believed that they were very close to the Mediterranean, not 400 miles away.
Right,
So they
right.
started walking in the opposite direction from where the aircraft wreckage now laid, and 400 miles. They just walked out into the desert, into the middle of nowhere, and all the men perished
I guess,
in
yeah, they
in
wouldn't
the
have had
desert.
any food or water or, yeah.
And so now let's move ahead in history.
Right. So,
From 1943, let's now go to 1958.
oh, all right.
And there were British geologists working for an oil company,
Mhm.
and they were flying
Right.
over the
Yeah.
Libyan desert. And these geologists are the one who spotted the wreckage of the airplane. Now, it hadn't been found
Oh,
before that, because even the Air Force, when it was recognized that the aircraft was overdue, didn't come back, they assumed it had crashed into the Mediterranean, not the
Right.
desert.
So they weren't going to
So,
find it
so
because,
there was no search effort made,
oh,
and
wow.
it wasn't until
oh
1958
no. That's
that these
sad.
geologists were flying, and they
Mhm.
saw the crashed B-24. They contacted the Air Force and said, hey, we just saw this crashed American World War II bomber. And the Air Force went, we don't have any record. We have no record of a bomber going down where you said it was.
Right.
So they sent an expedition team out to check this out. And yeah, that's when they fully discovered the wreckage of
Correct. Okay.
Good.
Mhm.
There was another expedition after that, in 1959, the next year. They set out to try to find the crew, and
Oh,
Okay.
they
So
that's
they
did find some
interesting.
of them. There were
did find
clues,
crew.
because
Yeah.
as these poor guys were trekking across the desert, they were leaving clues behind them. They would leave a shoe pointed in the direction they were
Oh,
going. They would leave their parachutes in the shape of an arrow pointed in the direction they were
Wow.
going.
Okay. So,
And so they did
what they should have.
actually find
I'm just
some
curious.
of the remains of the crew. That was the first search. 6 months after that, in 1960, they set out to try to find the remaining ones, again, which they were successful in doing. And yeah, that's the historical story of the Lady Be Good.